Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I hope that you all enjoyed the last Bible study that we did last week, and today we are going to be doing another one. So the past few studies we have been looking at the foreshadowing of Jesus in the Old Testament. Specifically, we've been looking at some spaces in Genesis. But today we're going to be taking a look at a very familiar story, and that is of the life of Joseph. And we are going to be examining this from a slightly different perspective. So not necessarily the foreshadowing of Jesus, but Joseph is a Christ-like figure. And you will get what I mean as we follow his story. And I'm going to point out some things to you that you may have never paid attention to before, which is the joy in doing all this. Like, we get to do a deep dive together and just observe and soak in the word in a way that we may have never done it in our personal studies, because sometimes we're just on the go and we're reading fast and we miss a few things. So that's the joy of being able to dive in together. So welcome. First, I want you all to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. That way that you do not miss any more studies, because like I said, I'm going to be here with you every single week, prayerfully, as this semester continues to go for me, because Lord, grad school is real, right? So as usual, I'm going to start with a little bit of context and backstory for you guys. I've gone over the author and the audience several times in the previous videos. So if you want a deep dive in those, just go ahead and go back and watch those other videos first. But for this section, we are going to be looking specifically at Genesis 45. That's where we're going to spend the most of our time, but I'm going to summarize the beginning of the story for you guys. I really encourage you all to read it yourselves. Genesis 37 through 50 is dedicated to the life of Joseph, and there's so much in here, like so much that will preach to you. And so I hate to kind of skim over it, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a backstory so that we can get to chapter 45 together. So Jacob, who God has named Israel, has 12 sons who will become the 12 different tribes of Israel, right? So that's where that comes from. These 12 sons are the heads of the tribes, and the tribes are named after each of the sons. Specifically, Joseph is the second to youngest son, right? And he is the son of Jacob's favorite wife, Jacob's wife, Rachel. And Jacob makes it very apparent that he is his favorite, which of course the other brothers do not like. On top of Joseph being the favorite son, he also has these dreams that come off kind of condescending to the other sons. And so the sons they have this disdain for him. They don't like him. So if you look at chapter 37 of Genesis, these are his dreams. In verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood right, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." So it's like kind of condescending, right? And so in verse 8, his brothers respond. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more. And then he tells them again another dream, which makes it even worse. So in verse 9, he tells them, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And so the sun and the moon represent his parents, and the 11 stars represent his 11 brothers bowing down to him. Now, as we progress and go through this story, we see that these dreams will actually come to reality. They're actually prophetic, but him sharing them with them at this time, they just could not receive it, and they already didn't like him. So we see here they hated him, they hated him, they hated him. And so fast forward, his brothers plot to kill him, and they actually come up with several different plans. At first, they want to kill him, and then his eldest brother, Reuben, says, "No, maybe we should just throw him in a cistern." They do that, and then Judah says, "No, let's sell him off to slavery." So they sell Joseph to some Midianites that are passing by. So Joseph ends up going into Egypt as a slave. So he goes from having these marvelous dreams of his brothers and his parents bowing down to him to being sold as a slave, someone who is owned, someone who is mistreated. But he gets to Egypt, and he's actually in the home of a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar is one of Pharaoh's officials. And Potiphar sees that the Lord is with Joseph. I want to read that to you all because I think it's so significant. He doesn't see, "Oh, he works so hard," or "Oh, he's so great." He sees God is with this man, and that's why he gives him favor. In chapter 39, verse 2, The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. It wasn't who Joseph was. It wasn't what Joseph earned. It wasn't the things, solely that Joseph did on his own, but it was that the Lord was with Joseph. How powerful is for someone to see that God is with you. It is just clear that God is with you. And so he received favor because of that. But unfortunately, that favor does not last. As we all know, Potiphar's wife found Joseph attractive and tried to get him to sleep with her, but he refused because of God. Because of God. In that same chapter 39, verse 9, Joseph says, "No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Not sin against my master, not sin for myself, but to sin against God. I could never sin against God. And so we see that Joseph has this heart for the Lord. The Lord is with him. The Lord is walking with him through all of these things, and he honors God. And so after that, this whole big ordeal spills out. Potiphar's wife blames Joseph, says that he tried to rape her. And so Joseph ends up being sent into prison. And so we see, again, these highs and these lows, these highs and these lows, and these lows are low. So Joseph is in prison. He meets a cupbearer and a chief baker that had worked with the Pharaoh. And they start having these dreams. And we know Joseph is a master of the dreams. He had dreams before, and that's kind of what got him here, okay? And so he tells them he can interpret their dreams. He interprets the dreams for them, and the cupbearer is restored and goes back to work for the Pharaoh. And Joseph tells him, "Remember me," but he forgets. And the Pharaoh, 2 years later, 2 years go by, Joseph is still in prison, and the Pharaoh starts to have some dreams, and no one can interpret them. The magicians can't interpret them. No one can interpret them, and it's really bothering Pharaoh. And all of a sudden, the cupbearer remembers, and he tells the Pharaoh, "Wait, when I was in prison, I remember meeting a Hebrew, and he was able to interpret my dreams, and it actually came to pass." This is chapter 41. And so he tells him this, and Pharaoh sends for Joseph. Joseph comes and he's able to interpret his dreams, and he tells him everything that's going to happen. He tells him in chapter 41, verse 28, "It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows will be so severe." The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And so Pharaoh is impressed by the fact that Joseph is able to interpret his dreams, and he puts him in charge. So he goes from being plotted to be killed by his brothers, being thrown in a cistern to be left for dead, being sold into slavery. Okay, yes, he has a second where he's in the house of Potiphar and he's in charge. And then he is thrown into prison for years and forgotten. And then he is out again and in charge, only second to Pharaoh in all of Egypt. And then this famine happens. So to bring the story full circle, this famine happens, and his family is in Canaan, and they're struggling. His father Jacob and his 11 brothers are struggling, and they're afraid that they're going to starve. In chapter 42, verse 1, it reads, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you just keep looking at each other?' He continued, 'I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die.'" So their lives are on the line, and they have to go ask for grain. And now Joseph is in Egypt, and he is over the rationing. He is over everything. So they're ending up having to go to the brother that they plotted to kill, that they wanted to destroy, that they hated, and they are having to bow down to him as he had dreamed before. They are having to ask him for food for their survival. Which brings us to chapter 45, where I want to spend our time in our study together today. So at first, Joseph's brothers, they come to Egypt and they ask for grain, and this whole ordeal happens that I want you all to read through on your own. They end up going back and coming back with all of them because they had left one brother behind, Joseph's only full brother, who was also the son of Rachel as well, because Jacob didn't want to send the youngest son. He didn't want to send the other son of his favorite wife, Rachel, because he had already lost one son who he thought had died. But he agrees. They go ahead and they send the son. And so on this second arrival, Joseph, he asks, okay, leave Benjamin here and go get your father. And they refuse. Judah says, no, he's going to be really heartbroken. We can't leave him here. And he sees this change in them. He sees this want to protect their brother and want to protect the feelings of their father, which is such a drastic shift than what we had seen before as it pertained to Joseph. And he is just overwhelmed with emotion. And so he decides to reveal himself to them. And verse 3 reads, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Y'all, can y'all imagine what they were thinking as he was talking? He immediately addresses the fear that they were probably feeling, like, oh my goodness, we know what we did and you recognize us. We know that you are going to be so angry with us. But he is not angry. He recognizes God's role. He recognizes God's plan. He recognizes God's providence. This is the first time that we are introduced to the providence of God. God's ability to work all things together for the good of those who love them. Romans 8:28. Let's read this together. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Joseph had been called according to the purpose of God. And he says it here. I was sent here to save lives. I was sent ahead so that there would be a remnant. I was sent ahead so that you would survive. The 12 tribes of Israel would survive. And so it's just so beautiful to see. And if you look at it parallel to the life of Jesus, there are so many similarities. Joseph suffered so that others could be saved. Joseph suffered so that Israel would be saved. Joseph suffered so that his people would be saved, so that they would not die, so that they would not perish, just as Jesus suffered for the salvation of all of those who believed. He went through all of these things that were according to God's plan, was honoring God throughout all of these things for the salvation of others. And how beautiful is it? I want us to just sit and reflect. There are so many things that we go through where we don't even recognize what God is doing in the time, but ultimately he works them together for our good. And that doesn't mean that we will never go through anything bad, as we see here in Joseph's life, as we saw in the life of Jesus. There was suffering. There were terrible things that happened, but the finality of it, the end of it, the way that God worked it together at the conclusion was for the good, When I think back to nursing school, if you all watched the very first videos on my channel, I did not understand why I was failing at the time. And it was so hard for me. And honestly, at the end of it, I saw, okay, God worked this together for my good. Out of it, I was able to know him more. I was able to have an encounter with him that was personal, that wasn't just what my mom or my grandparents had told me about God and Jesus, but I was able to see him really move and really work in my own life And that just sparked this passion for him where I wanted to build this platform and teach others and tell others about Jesus. And I'm so grateful now for what I saw happen in my life that I thought was a failure. Something that I was like, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know why I'm going through this. But ultimately, it worked together for my good. And I see how it just has influenced my calling. And I know so many stories, and I know that you all can relate, where you don't understand why it's so hard for you on your job, or why you took the path that you are going through, or whatever is happening to you, why you're suffering the depression, why you're in the horrible relationship, why you have anxiety, why you were born into the family that, just does not like you, or whatever it may be. But all things work together for the good of those who love him. That is our truth. That is our reality. And I think if we go through life and we think as we're going through things, God is going to use this, God is going to use this, whether it's good or whether it's bad, we will have just this new, fresh perspective and an ability to get through things like we have never been able to before. If we're going through something, we're like, why me? Why me, God? I'm over this. I'm done. I'm giving up on you. I don't believe. Imagine how much we're going to struggle. But if we have that perspective, like, I know God's going to use this. I know in the end it's going to work together for the good. I know that. How much easier will it be? How much lighter will it be? His yoke is easy. His burden is light. Give it to God and rest assured and know that it's going to work together for your good. And so I hope that you all enjoyed this study. I hope that you have a fresh insight and that you were able to make some parallels between the life of Joseph and the life of Jesus. I also hope that this sparked an interest in actually going back and reading this, because all of this is just so good. Thank you guys so much again for watching and tuning in with me today. I will see y'all next time.